everyone. Good morning. Good morning. What a fantastic video. My name is Paul Foley. I'm an associate professor at the Environmental Policy Institute at Memorial University's Grenfell campus in Corner Brook on the west coast of Newfoundland. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you here, all of you in the room and all of you in Zoom, to the fourth World Small Scale Fisheries Congress. I'll take this moment to invite our distinguished guests up to the stage. Please join us. And on behalf of the International Organizing Committee, I would like to say that we respectfully acknowledge the territory in which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk and the island of Newfoundland as the ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq and Beothuk. We would also like to recognize the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and Nunatuhavut and the Innu of Nitassinan and their ancestors as the original people of Labrador. We strive for respectful relationships with all the peoples of this province as we search for collective healing and true reconciliation and honor this beautiful land together. So the work that we're here to do today, tomorrow, and Wednesday is built on new and old relationships across Newfoundland and Labrador, across North America, and indeed globally. This Congress is a part of a series of regional congresses that together make up the fourth World Small Scale Fisheries Congress, which is a transdisciplinary forum for anyone interested in small scale fisheries to participate in an interactive discussion about small scale fisheries. And the purpose of the Congress is to facilitate knowledge exchange, to foster collaboration, and to mobilize support for the viability and sustainability of small-scale fisheries. As you've seen in the program, we have a very exciting set of plenaries and sessions in store for the days ahead. We also have some special guests here this morning to welcome you. First, I would like to invite His Worship, Mayor Danny Breen, Mayor of St. John's, to deliver a welcome to this beautiful city.
Good morning, and on behalf of St. John's City Council, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you in person and virtually to the City of St. John's to participate in the World Small Scales Fisheries Conference. First, let me particularly welcome you to historic downtown St. John's. Our small walkable downtown is anchored next to a sheltered harbor where mariners have taken refuge for hundreds of years. Just beyond the Narrows, the vast open Atlantic Ocean has been what drives our economy. And it is from the ocean from which we draw not only our sense of place, but also our position today in the global economy. This place grew from the fishing industry, and today that is complemented by the energy, tourism, and art sectors. Our ocean technologies are world leading with a robust research and development ecosystem. We are an ocean city powerhouse. These events are so important to our city. Aside from the opportunity to host visitors and further our tourism potential, we have recognized that events can have a dual purpose and benefit. Links to key economic sectors, in this case ocean sciences, create mutual benefit with education and the research community and the private sector as well. As you know, our research and development community are world leaders in the ocean technology industry. We are home to companies and facilities that are known globally for their leading and innovative technologies. We're a university city, and our relationship with Memorial is certainly one of our strongest advantages. We have mutually supportive and complementary objectives and see much potential in working together. Your theme of getting it right is more important than ever as you discuss the changes and challenges being faced by North America's small-scale fisheries. From climate to COVID, these past few years have been challenging. However, I am optimistic that events like these and the valuable discussions happening here can progress policies and research to benefit and promote sustainable fisheries, coastal communities, and ocean activities. While you are here in our beautiful city, I hope you will have some time to experience the inspired food offerings in our growing list of restaurants and eateries. Stop by a retail store take home a locally crafted product, or perhaps take a short visit to Kitty Vitty, a little fishing harbor just 5 minutes from downtown, where artisans, hiking, and a local brewery will provide a day's worth of experiences. Now, I have to tell you, you might have seen in the news recently that we're the happiest people in the country. And as mayor, I'm allowed to talk about this because I'm supposed to be totally biased. That's part of our job description. But what I wanted to explain a little bit is that why we're the happiest people is not because of the great walking trails we have. It's not about the great scenery we have, the vibrant arts community, all those things. But it's about the people that make up our province. And one of the things in that report that I really honed in on was that people want to live in a place where they can raise their family, make a living, and where they feel they belong. And one of the beautiful things about Newfoundland and Labrador is the people. And as the people know that when there is trouble, when they have needs, that Newfoundlanders and Labradorians have their back. And we've proven it through COVID and many other challenges that we've had in our 500 years. So we're very pleased to be considered the happiest people, but we're the happiest people because of the people that we have. So today, if you're looking for more information, I encourage you to drop by our Visitors Information Center at 348 Water Street. Our staff are there, and they're going to be able to help you out and answer any questions you have. That's not far from here. It's just down there next to George Street. You might know where George Street is. If you don't, you might know by the time you leave. But I hope you do enjoy your stay here, and we're very pleased to host you here because this is what we like to do, host people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Next, we have Mr. Tony Doyle, Vice President Inshore of the Fish, Food and Allied Workers Unifor Executive Board.
Morning, everybody. As Paul just mentioned, my name is Tony Doyle. I'm a fish harvester from the town of Beatty Bird, which is just across the bay from here. And we have the largest fish crab plant in the world, the most modern, owned by Quilton Brothers. It's a fishing community for the last 300-400 years. I've lived there and fished there all my life. And today I'm here to greet you on behalf of all the fish harvesters of Newfoundland. I'm the Vice President of the inshore sector for the FFAW. And it's a pleasure to welcome you all, both personally and those who are online. The small scale fisheries is what made this province. It's the reason why people came here. It wasn't for the farming, it was for the fishing. The vast resources that we had in the ocean. And it's the social and economic viability of our rural Newfoundland, and for the cities also, because whatever happens in rural Newfoundland, if people are doing good, making a good living, that spills over into the nearby cities with visitation, shopping experiences and all that. And this event that's taking place today, I think this is very important for us to come together and try and figure out some of the things that we need to do to be able to sustain our oceans and sustain our fisheries for the long term. It's a great way of life. It's a dangerous life, but it's very rewarding and fulfilling to come home at the end of the day with a good catch. And we've been blessed with that here on the island for the last, well, for my lifetime anyways, and before. most of the inshore harvesters live in rural Newfoundland. And what happens there, as I said, and as we do well, so does the rest of the province. It spills over into the economy, and it makes, as Mr. Green said, it makes us a happy people. I have some information that regarding the fishery and our province and how the fisheries are going in a presentation that I'll do after lunch. So with that said, again, welcome to you all. I hope you enjoy your stay, have a chance to try some of our local seafood and maybe a beer or drink down on George Street. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. George Street's becoming popular already. Next, we have up Mr. William McGilvery, Regional Director General, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador region.
Yeah, good morning. And thank you for the invitation to speaking this morning. Certainly encouraging to see this event being held here in this province, available both in person and virtually. Great to see people back together. It's great to see. I'm glad to see that. I understand that many of you have traveled from far away. So if it's your first time here or second, 100th time, welcome to Newfoundland and Labrador. As newly appointed Regional Director General for Fisheries and Oceans Canada in Newfoundland and Labrador, I have been meeting with community and industry stakeholders and have heard praise and concerns about the critical role of the Government of Canada in regulating ocean sectors. Through these discussions, I have witnessed the tremendous passion and desire to ensure the conservation and long-term viability of the fishery. Expectations are high on what the government should be doing to support these goals and how we need to get it right. Fostering an ongoing dialogue and working in the spirit of collaboration is something DFO will continue to spearhead. Forums like this one are key to increase our common knowledge, create the space for challenging topics to be discussed, and great ideas and partnerships to emerge. I'm quite aware of the function of fish harvesting and seafood production plays an economic, cultural, and social fabric of many coastal communities throughout Newfoundland and Labrador. I have briefly reviewed some of the key themes of this year's Congress and struck by how well it aligns with the work and the objectives of the department, particularly adaptation, conservation, aquaculture, and the blue economy. So our minister has been directed by the Prime Minister of Canada to work to support sustainable, stable, and prosperous fisheries. If you indulge me, I'd like to tell you about a couple of significant pieces of work that the department is doing, including marine conservation targets, the blue economy strategy, and the modernization of the Fisheries Act. So to foster stability and long-term sustainability, DFO is working on marine conservation targets with Indigenous, provincial partners, academia, stakeholders, and the public to meet the Government of Canada's goal to protect 25% of Canada's marine and coastal areas by 2025 and 30% by 2030. So Newfoundland and Labrador has already significantly contributed to these goals, and I'm proudly to say that approximately 15% of the current national goals are in this province. Work is also underway in developing a blue economy strategy for the Government of Canada. So when the strategy is released, it will outline a vision to ocean-related sectors and help guide future government action and investments. Investments will enable Canada's economy's long-term growth while protecting our oceans. Public consultations on the strategy took place from February to June of last year, and that the What We Heard document is available online. Would encourage you to check it out. And I understand that the Secretariat, the Blue Economy Secretariat, will also be here to present in this Congress. Additionally, the continued implementation of the modernized Fisheries Act restores loss protections, rebuilds fish populations, and incorporates modern safeguards to protect fish and fish habitats for future generations. Under the Modernized Act, Canada's fisheries can continue growing the economy and sustaining coastal communities. Canada's ocean contribute to $36 billion to the economy annually and are a source of approximately 300,000 jobs. Fish and seafood is the largest sector, accounting for about $7.6 billion in GDP. The fish and seafood sector is also a key contributor to the Newfoundland and Labrador economy, valued at approximately $1.4 billion and employs around about 16,000 people throughout the province. In our province, the inshore harvesting sector and small boat harvesters within this group currently make a significant contribution to the fishing industry and the communities they call home. I firmly believe that a prosperous and sustainable inshore harvesting sector will continue to be pivotal contributor to the continued success of our vibrant coastal communities. We know the key to this long-term success is supported by engagement, consultation, and informed policy development. At DFO, we are working hard to get it right, here and national. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing about what has been discussed here in the Congress and the key policy themes that might be put forward. So thank you again for this opportunity to speak with you this morning. I hope you have certainly a productive and successful conference. And for those visiting in person, I hope you get a chance to experience, like the others, George Street, restaurants, the great warmth and hospitality that we provide here in Newfoundland and Labrador. Have a great Congress, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Next, we have Dr. Tane Allen, Acting Associate Vice President Research at Memorial University.
Thank you, Paul. Good morning, everyone. It is wonderful to be here and to join you at the start of your meetings. Before I offer you the comments I've prepared, I do want to take a moment to do our land acknowledgement, if that's all right. We respectfully acknowledge the territory in which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk and the island of Newfoundland as the ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq and the Beothuk. We would also like to recognize the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and Nunatakavut and the Innu of Nitassinan and their ancestors as the original people of Labrador. We strive for respectful relationships with all the peoples of this province as we search for collective healing and true reconciliation and honor this beautiful land together. And I hope you'll get to see a lot of this beautiful land over the next few days. On behalf of Memorial University, it is a pleasure to welcome you here to Newfoundland and Labrador and the beautiful and historic city of St. John's. I'd like to acknowledge especially our delegates who have traveled to our province to participate over the next few days, as well as those of you who are joining us online and virtually in Zoom, I think. Thank you to all the organizers, particularly the Ocean Frontier Institute and Too Big to Ignore, a global partnership for small-scale fisheries research, for leading the North American component of this worldwide Congress. And I know that there are many different sessions of this taking place over the coming months. Your event is significant as we celebrate the 2022 International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture. And I understand you have an interesting few days ahead of you with lots of informative talks and discussions, plenary sessions, and fun activities. Don't miss the movie tomorrow night, I think it is, at the Bruno Center on St. John's campus. It is very fitting for this Congress to take place in Newfoundland and Labrador, and for Memorial, the university, to play an integral role in your event. Here, on a rock in the middle of the harsh North Atlantic, we have a living laboratory quite literally on our doorstep. The water that surrounds us has influenced our people and communities for generations. Our natural beauty is the envy of most research institutions around the world. Memorial and its partners draw inspiration from the ocean that surrounds us. In fact, more than 40% of Memorial's research is oceans related. 40%. We truly are a global leader when it comes to the ocean. This was evident with the recently released Times Higher Education Impact Rankings. And these rankings measure the impact of universities in contributing to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Memorial did exceptionally well this year, ranking among the top 30 universities worldwide for its leadership in addressing issues related to life below water, and that's goal number 14, placing number 28 out of 452 universities. That's amazing. I'm going to say it again, 28 out of 452 universities, so well done. As our research teams embrace the United Nations Oceans Decade, they play a central role in helping address real-life challenges facing our world. I know many researchers from our Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, and that is my home faculty. Many of these researchers are leading innovative projects about life below the water and life on land near the water. During this week, I sincerely hope you get a chance to meet some of Memorial's outstanding researchers and students and learn about their groundbreaking work. I've met a few this morning, actually, as I was having some coffee. And on that note, I wish you a wonderful Congress and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and meet lots of you and participate. So have a wonderful Congress. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Allen, and thanks again to each of you for taking the time this morning to share your welcome and your words of encouragement. Now I'd like to pass things over to my colleague, Dr. Ratana Chinpagdi, who is the chair of the International Organizing Committee, project director of Too Big to Ignore, and principal investigator of the Informing Governance Responses in a Changing Ocean from OFI.
Thank you very much, Paul, for that, and also our guests for delivering a welcome speech. So good morning, everybody who's joining us here in this room and also online. As has been mentioned, this is the fourth in the series. Normally, we meet every 4 years and we go to various places. The first one was in Thailand, where I'm from, and then we went to Mexico. 2018, we went back to another part of Thailand. And this year, original plan was to trying to go to Africa, which we will be there later this year. But because of COVID and everything, and also because it's an international year for artisanal fisheries and aquaculture, we think that it would be best to try to bring the Congress to the regions. So that way we would really provide space for people to talk about important topics that are relevant and providing also the space to make a network of researchers, practitioners, policymakers, and government officials to trying to put things together and to support small-scale fisheries. So the first Congress was held in Japan, and we are very pleased to have the host of the Congress in Japan with us today. I would like to welcome Dr. Yinji Lee to speak a little bit about the Congress in Japan.
Ohayo gozaimasu. Good morning, everyone. This is Inji Lee from Tokai University, Japan. I am the coordinator of the TBTI Japan Research Network. And I'm so excited to be here at the North America Conference. Since its launch in 2020, TBTI Japan has carried out so many activities, including publication of ebooks, organizing sessions and workshops, and running outreach programs, etc. And most importantly, we were hugely honored to host this Asia Pacific conference last month in Japan, which resulted in a fruitful outcome, thanks to the cooperation from everyone. And I wish the North America conference a huge success. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so it's not very often that we would have a host of the first Congress to come and visit us in St. John's, but Yinji actually spent a year on her sabbatical with us, so it's just coming back home to the happy place.
Yes, yes.
Now we're going to ask another important person for this Congress, which is one of the co-chairs of the Congress, Dr. Evan Andrews, to come up to the stage and receive the little gift from Japan, and then give you a speech.
Thank you. I feel like I just won an award. I want to thank my fellow nominees. Hello, everyone. So we're not on Zoom anymore, so we have to interact now. Hello, everyone. My name is Evan Andrews. For those of you that don't know me, I am a senior research fellow with Too Big to Ignore, a global partnership for small-scale fisheries research. As part of this welcome, I want to talk about why we are being so bold and encourage you to have 3 exciting and dynamic days where you explore prospects for getting it right. So our honored speakers told you about some of the events and trends that are happening that bring us together today. This Congress really comes at an important time to talk about life above water in addition to life below. You've heard about the International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture. So that's IAFA for short. If you hear IAFA, that's what that is. This is coming only a few years after Canada has signed on as a friend to the voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries. And this is the SSF guidelines, if you hear that. Some of you may know, may even live through it or worked through it, that this year marks the 30-year anniversary of the first moratorium on commercial fishing of northern cod. So it's not only an exciting time, but also a poignant anniversary that tells us many voices are needed to guide fisheries and ocean sustainability. At the same time, we heard about some strategic directions from the Canadian government for fisheries and oceans, the blue economy, the emerging strategy, the marine conservation targets, amended Fisheries Act, new inshore fisheries regulations. And all of this is happening during the global movement to advance blue justice for small-scale fisheries around the world and now in North America. So together, the timing of this all urges us to be bold, to talk in the language of getting it right, because the time for getting it wrong is over. Each one of you has something to share, an expertise worth listening to. We just need to listen to one another and try to talk with and negotiate our different perspectives. The Congress is closely tied, as you heard, to the Ocean Frontier Institute Module I, Informing Governance in a Changing Ocean. And through this research, we learned that there are many it's to get right in service of sustainable fisheries, coastal communities, and ocean activities. So for this Congress, we've envisioned 7 themes or dimensions of getting it right: adaptation, small, governance, conservation, the blue economy, aquaculture, and of course, the future. So using these themes over the next 3 days, we're going to be zooming in and zooming out and having exciting conversations about what the goals should be, about connections, about interactions. In short, we've tasked each and every one of you with getting everything right. And this really means getting the next steps for fisheries and oceans in North America and bringing recognition to small-scale fisheries on this continent. We want to hear about your expertise, but we have a challenge for you. And this is, we will also want you to surprise everyone. Some of you know each other for 30 years. Let's say something different. Let's say something new and exciting. So as I said, this is a time to have a great interaction, something new after two years, maybe not so much practice interacting with one another. So we're going to get to it right away. The beauty of this Congress is we have different perspectives in the room. We have people from the fishing industry, from communities, from government, civil society, university, including natural scientists, and also social scientists and humanists here. So this is an opportunity to come together, to navigate our differences, move beyond convention, and build something new. And with that, I wish you the best of Congresses and an enjoyable 3 days. Thank you so much.
I like taking Evan around with me. He was in Thailand, in Chiang Mai in 2018. At that time, was still finishing up his PhD. And look where he is now, right? So he's the next one. This is great. Okay, so my job is to just to talk a little bit about the Congress program. So you have in your kit the program booklet. You should also have the revised program, and hopefully there will not be further revision, but as you can imagine, right, things are very dynamic around us. So the program booklet should let you figure it out, a few things like logistics and etc. that you need to do. But we organize the Congress in a very simple format. You're going to spend a lot of time here together in this room. This is where the plenary sessions would take place. Each plenary really would allow a lot of time to interact with each other, to really challenge each other and trying to think about what is it that we need to do to support sustainable small-scale fisheries in Canada, in US, in other parts of the world. So the message that will be coming from this Congress would actually be part of what we contribute to the International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture. So I am in the steering committee of IAFA this year. So I have promised them that we would bring key messages so that people who may not think that places like Canada and US have small-scale fisheries even, they would hear from us. So let's put our energy together and trying to come up with what we want to say about small-scale fisheries in North America. Plenary 1, plenary 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you can see that, right? So when we do the plenary, we do it in this room. When we go into the concurrent sessions, we would have room B, C, D, and Placentia Bay. So they're just kind of behind us here. So you just have to go out the door and then trying to find the room. Salon B is a little bit tricky to get to. You just have to kind of like go around the corner. But I learned a secret passage to Salon B, you can actually go to it from C and D. So if you stay in there and you kind of like, oop, I need to go to another room. That's how you do it. But Placentia Bay is across the hall. So again, they are set to really provide opportunity to interact and exchange idea and get to know each other more. So we do that, right? And then every evening, we would have something that you should, that's like a social event. So tonight, there will be a reception, so just outside, so more opportunity to interact. We do that during breaks. For lunch, as we noted in the program, you actually have an opportunity to interact and go and visit places very near here. There are many places. You have some of the menu on the table actually, where you can go and have nice Indian food or Chinese food or other food that you enjoy. The most important thing is for you to come back in time. I have ordered Congress weather for you, meaning that this is the best place to be. The hotel also has food, so if you don't want to go out, they have like a soup and sandwich special for our delegates, right? So you can do that. Or just hang out and there'll be, more cookies and, some trail mix, whatever, and lots of fruit as well. Okay, so you enjoy that, right? So the most important thing is to spend time together and do things that you like to do, things that we haven't done for 2 years. On day 2, we will start the day here, and it will be like a summary of day 1. So recapping some of the key points, and then we go back to the plenary, 2 more plenaries tomorrow, and then another really good concurrent sessions. And then we will invite you to St. John's campus. You can get a chance to visit the campus as well. Join us there to be part of this film screening. So we have a special treat for you there. This is, I believe, the first time that the movie will be filmed, will be screened actually. So there will be buses leaving from the hotel right at the end of the concurrent session, 7:30. Go there and enjoy pizza that we would host upstairs on the 3rd floor, and then and then go see the movie. And then, of course, tomorrow is the longest day, apparently. And so Georgia Street always open. So when we come back here, you can still visit and enjoy yourself as long as you come back on day 3. Because on day 3, it's all going to be plenary. So we stay here. We're going to talk about everything until we get everything right. Otherwise, we would not leave. I have to put some reminders. Okay, do check the program because whatever you have downloaded earlier might not reflect what's happening here. So do check the program. Session needs to start on time. So the first plenary would be queuing up very soon because we have, it's a hybrid, right? So people are waiting to join the session. Everybody has to start on time. It can end early, but cannot end beyond time. So once the time ends, you have to stop, the session will stop on its own. So you won't be able to extend, you can't do that. Other speakers, if you have PowerPoint, earlier we said that you can bring it to the laptop in the room. Sorry, we need to make some adjustment. You should bring it to the registration desk, and let's do that by lunchtime before you need to speak. If you're plenary for this afternoon, could you just see us right after this, right after, before you go to lunch, that'd be great. But yes, please bring your PowerPoint presentation in a USB, give it to the registration desk. They would put it in the right computer for you. If you are joining online and you are presenting virtually, you are in charge of your own presentation. You don't need to send it to us. Okay. So no, you will not be able to present or plug in your laptop because again, the session doesn't allow you to do that, right? So I know you like your laptop, but we're just gonna have to use whatever is in the room. Like I said, there are several places to go to lunch. You should be able to do that on your own and, grab some local people and enjoy whatever you have, whatever St. John's the city has to offer. Oh, I do have that last point. I was not supposed to say that, but anyway, it's already on the screen. So yes, the complaint department is permanently closed, but we definitely welcome suggestions. So if you need any help, you can come to us and we'd be happy to help you. And these are some of the people who could help you. I would like to really thank our international organizing committee. We call them IOC for the Olympic, right? Because they have run like an Olympic committee, putting all these sessions together. Can you all please stand up? The International Organizing Committee. We need to give you a big round of applause. And don't sit down yet. Come on. We have a little gift for you. So the gift people, please go to the committee and please stay up there, right? You would all see in the program that our Congress committees, the people who will be running the plenary sessions, and some of them are organizing other sessions as well for us. So they have worked very hard to put this program together, and they'll be with us throughout. And we definitely appreciate all the work that has gone into organizing this. Thanks again, everybody. Okay. Now, we also have a team of technical support, and you would be able to identify them by the blue T-shirt that they're wearing. Can we get all the tech support to stand up and show the beautiful T-shirt? Thank you very much for that. So they'll be with you when you go into your sessions and help you with anything you like, except to plug in your laptop to the projector, okay? And so you'll be in good hands. And of course, we have one very important person who we need to thank. This Congress could not have been possible without the work, tireless effort of Vesna. Vesna has been with TBTI and OFI Module I for the longest time. And we definitely need to thank Vesna. So where is Vesna? I just saw Vesna quickly. Vesna, can you please come here? Can you please come here? So Vesna likes flowers, and so do I. So there you have it, a little flowers for Vesna. And there's also a little bit of candies for the kids in the room. Okay, I think that's all I need to do because it's about 10:20. See, I'm keeping the time. So we're gonna take a pause, a very short break so that we can transition to the next session, which is happening at 10:30. We'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the Congress. Okay, the first plenary for this morning would be getting adaptation right. So if you ever have any question about what does it mean, what do we need to do, here is the time. And for this session, we have Sarah Harper and Maria Gomez to help us get through the session. Sarah, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. My name is Sarah Harper. I'm a postdoc at the University of Victoria, and I've been affiliated loosely with TBTI since its inception. I think about 10 years ago, I was in this exact room. But I just wanted to say a big welcome to everyone. I'm so grateful to be here among so many brilliant and inspiring colleagues and advocates for small-scale fisheries. I'm really excited to be back on the Atlantic coast. I have deep family roots here, and as soon as I stepped off the plane, I felt really at home and welcomed. And I think it's a combination of how friendly people are and just that lovely, salty Atlantic coast air. So in this session, we're focusing on adaptation, and more specifically on getting adaptation right. As the first thematic plenary in this conference, this is a great opportunity to share ideas and experiences on the challenges and opportunities for getting adaptation right and ensuring small-scale fisheries exist into the future. So before we launch into this amazing lineup of speakers, let's just take a quick minute to frame the conversation. So exactly what do we mean by adaptation in the context of small-scale fisheries, and what are we adapting to? There's many definitions of adaptation out there, but here we're drawing on a broad definition of adaptation as anticipating and or responding to change. And in terms of what we're adapting or responding to, we're also looking broadly at the range of social, economic, environmental, and institutional challenges and changes that our small-scale fishers, fishing communities, and fishing businesses are navigating. And these include, but are not limited to, climate change, shocks and challenges that have come up because of the pandemic, and many of the related issues of supply chains, and many more. We're curious about the ways small-scale fisheries are vulnerable to these changes, and in other ways, how they can be or are resilient. We want to understand and leverage examples of getting adaptation right across and through small-scale fisheries. And for this session, we have this wonderful lineup of 4 speakers, both in person and joining virtually. The first half of the session is we're going to hear from each of the panelists, sharing their insights and experiences, highlighting the ways that we can get adaptation right, either through identifying what are the key considerations, what tools we need or have to be able to navigate, and examples of where we are getting things right, and need to amplify and understand these examples and leverage them across all small-scale fisheries. So I'm going to open up here with the first panelist, Sonia Strobel. Sonia is co-founder and CEO of Skipper Autos, a community-supported fishery based on Coast Salish territory in Vancouver. Sonia has worked in a variety of community-based organizations, nonprofits, and as a high school teacher for many years. She's on advisory committees with Fisheries for Communities Coalition, the Local Catch Network, Slowfish Canada, and many more. She's president of Friends of Granville Island Society, a fellow with the Royal Canadian Geographic Society, and business mentor for the Forum. She is a creative problem solver, an enthusiastic innovator, and a champion of social and environmental justice. Sonia has been a member of community-supported agriculture programs since the early 1990s and brought her knowledge of CSAs to the family fishery, first conceiving of the idea for one of the first CSFs, community-supported fisheries in the world in 2008. And I'm proud to say I've been a member of Skipper Autos since 2009, and it's wonderful, but it's been really wonderful to see their business grow and the community that they've developed in the process. So please join me in welcoming Sonia.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for that welcome. Very kind. Let's see. I wonder if I can see my slides here somewhere. It's doing something. Oh, here it comes. Okay, great. Making sure the technology is working. Can you hear me okay? Excellent. Thank you so much for having me. It was a real honor to be asked to speak here today on this plenary, especially. I often have a little imposter syndrome in these rooms because I'm not an academic. And so thank you. Thanks for having me. As Sarah said, I'm Sonia Strobel. Oh, I'm using this. Oh, look at that. That's my family. 20 so years ago, I married into a fishing family on beautiful Coast Salish territory in Vancouver, BC, the traditional unceded territory of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. And I'm lucky enough to be a 3rd generation inhabitant of those lands on my dad's side, 1st generation on my mom's side. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about, oh, here we go. Sorry, technology is a little bit slow this morning. It's a 4.5 hour time zone change, so we're a little discombobulated this morning. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about community-supported fisheries and the role I think that they play in making small-scale fisheries more adaptable and more adaptive to change. So community-supported, or let's think about a little bit about seafood in Canada. About 90% of what we harvest in Canada is exported. And about 80% of what we get in our grocery stores and our restaurants is imported. And so the food system that we have here in Canada is entirely an extractive, system. It really was set up that way as a colonial system that, colonies were set up to extract resources, to send those resources somewhere else, not to feed people who live here in these communities. And that's really what we're living with today, a system that wasn't designed to feed Canadians. There's all kinds of consequences, unintended consequences that come with it's not working. Come with a food system like that. Maybe if I push on here, it will go. No, not working anymore. Okay, maybe somebody can advance my slide for me. Not going. There we go. Hey, nice, thank you. So all kinds of unintended consequences that come from this very export-oriented and industrial scale extractive system that we have. You probably know a lot of these statistics here. I'm speaking to the choir in this room. Mislabeling is a big problem in seafood in Canada. Somewhere around half of the seafood that we're getting isn't exactly what it is, as it is on the label. Slavery is rampant in industrial harvesting, and dubious fisheries with all kinds of environmental and social problems. That's where our fish comes from in this country. And yet here we harvest some of the best managed seafood in some of the cleanest water in the world, and we can't access it. We can't get it in the grocery store. Next slide, please. Awesome. So tragically, many First Nations can't access their traditional food source either because of the system that we live within here. So local people unable to access fisheries, fish in their communities has massive social, economic, environmental justice implications. And we need to be doing a better job of addressing those. So I think it's important for us to remember that the value of that fish is not always in dollars. It's not always in GDP. The value of that fish is in a way of life. And when we lose that way of life, we lose more than just dollars. Next slide, please. Thank you. So one solution in my mind is community-supported fisheries. And so community-supported fisheries, wait a second, how many of you know what a community-supported fishery is? Okay, thank you, great. So on a high level, a community-supported fishery is a network that connects harvesters directly to end consumers usually through some kind of a subscription model. And there are many, many versions of community-supported fisheries throughout North America and around the world. And so I'll just tell you a little bit about. No, I can't advance it. Advance my slide, please. I'll tell you a little bit about how Skipper Auto works. So thank you, Sarah, for being a member since the very beginning. So Skipper Auto members, they join Skipper Auto at the start of the season before the fishing season. So that means before the end of May. And they commit to eating a certain dollar value of seafood caught by our fishing families that year. So we have a little share size calculator that helps them figure out how much seafood they might eat in a year. And they invest that at the start of the year. And then all throughout the year, they can log into this online store for members only. And then you can see the credit up in the top corner there. This person has $79 left in their account. And then they can pick and choose from the catch. And they can see like real time who's catching what, where, when, and how. And they can pick from the catch. And the dollar value comes off of their pre-purchased credit like that. Next slide, please. And then they choose a pickup location. So we have over 90 pickup locations throughout a pretty big section of Canada, from Victoria to Ottawa, east to west, from Fort St. John to Windsor, north to south. And these are in big cities, small communities. And so you choose your pickup location, your order is shipped there. Next slide, please. And then every piece of fish, if you go back one there, thanks. Every piece of fish comes with a label like this. And so it tells you all the information that I think you should be getting from every seafood label in Canada, which is the scientific name, who caught it, when, where, how, little biography of the harvester. So you really are connected very personally to one of our 40 fishing families. So next slide, please. So this is where it all started. Skipper Otto is my father-in-law on the left there. He started fishing for salmon in BC in the 1960s. And that's my husband, Sean, in the middle when he was 7, when he started fishing. And this might be familiar to some of you who come from fishing families. There's a proud multi-generational thing for fishing families. And And that's me when, not long after I married into the family. When I married into the family 20 odd years ago, I was kind of surprised to see what a difficult go it is for fishing families, that fishing families take on all the risk at the start of the year, going deep into lines of credit to set up their boats and their gear with no guarantee around their access, no guarantee around what they'll catch or what they'll be paid. And when our first son, Oliver, was born in 2008, the idea for Skipperotto, the community supported fishery, was born with him, because I feared that this fishing way of life that had come to be part of my life now would disappear for my children. And I needed to think of a solution. So I didn't plan to have a business. I was a high school teacher. I was busy, but it just seemed like something that needed to be done and that nobody else was doing. And so off we went. Next slide, please. So 14 years later, we've grown. We have 40 fishing families now in Skipperotto. They're all families that we know personally and that we work with personally. And we've very intentionally and slowly grown over those 14 years to welcome other fishing families. And sorry, I had to add this picture at the last minute on the top right-hand corner, because this is us offloading prawns just like 5 days ago, I guess. Over on Vancouver Island. And so it really is us directly working with our fishing families. Next slide, please. And today we have just over 8,300 members across Canada who pre-purchased the catch of those 40 fishing families, guaranteeing them a fair price for no matter what they catch. Those members who agree to eat with the ecosystem, no matter what they catch. Next slide, please. You can go back one. I think there was a question first. Oh yeah, oh, there's one in the middle there. So this is the question. I'm going to bring it back to the plenary topic here of how do community supported fisheries enable small scale fisheries to adapt and respond to uncertainty and to change. So next slide, please. And this is really what we do at Skipperotto. So we believe in our theory of change that a resilient, adaptable, just, and equitable seafood system is the result of the unique contributions of members of many separate communities, rather than a sort of purely top-down, profit-driven business model. It's actually about how communities interact with one another that brings about the change. Next slide, please. And so one way that this is evident is in this very different relationship that our members have to their seafood and to their harvesters. So when our members pre-purchase a share in the catch before the fishing season starts, our families can head out fishing knowing that they have a guaranteed fair market for their catch, no matter what that is, because they agree to eat with the ecosystem. And so, for example, last year in British Columbia, the Minister of Fisheries announced the closure of some 60% of salmon openings while we were on our way to the fishing grounds, with no plan to compensate fishing families who had already incurred the costs of the fishery. And so for fishing families who were able to pivot, able to fish for something else, to fish in another area, then they knew they had a fair market no matter what they were going to have access to. And so we were able to help fishing families adapt to that kind of whipsawing that happens in policy change sometimes. Another example is that in British Columbia, I don't know if you know this, but we harvest more hake than any other fish on the coast. Did you know that? Have you ever had British Columbia hake? No, you know why? Because we export all of it. Doesn't even come to our shores. It's caught by factory trawlers, frozen at sea and exported. But we found the one independent family still harvesting hake. And we've been creating markets for hake. British Columbians, Canadians are interested in what is abundant. And what will happen on the policy level is that governments will say, well, Canadians don't want to eat hake. We don't need to make a local market for that. We're able to illustrate that there are local markets for what is abundant. And so therefore we are able to bring about some change. Climate change is another one that we'll be facing. Squid have been showing up in British Columbia waters. We currently don't have a commercial fishery for them, but we need policies that will allow us to harvest what is abundant, what's arriving in our waters with climate change. And Skipperotto members, community supported fishery members say, we will eat what's abundant. We'll eat what comes. So this is how we can help our members help to make those fisheries more adaptable to change. Next slide. Thank you. Policy engagement, I've sort of already started to talk about this. policy engagement for just policy advocacy is a really important feature of community-supported fisheries. You know, as we approach 10,000 members, that's a lot of people in Canada who actually know harvesters personally and who actually care about policies that will affect them. And so we can actually engage the public in policy advocacy and decision-making when they know they're harvesters, when they care about these things. They're members for a whole year. I have them as a captive audience. So we can educate them over that whole year. Next slide, please. So a really good example of this was in 2021 when the DFO reinterpreted the Fisheries General Regulation to effectively make illegal the 50-year-old practice of tailing and tubbing spot prawns at sea. And this is a practice that allowed harvesters to sell their catch directly into domestic markets for the best price possible. And so with no consultation and no notice and no compensation, the DFO changed this interpretation of the regulation and said that harvesters, this was only a couple of months before the fishery, would no longer be able to engage in this practice. And this would drastically reduce the price that they could receive for their catch. There was no reason, there was no logic, there was no science. And so we reached out to our members and said, you know, what do you think of this? Here's a petition, please sign it. We gathered together with harvest organizations, gear method organizations, harvesters, other associations, local governments, Indigenous governments, who also wanted to engage on this topic. We were able to get 4,000 signatures, I think, overnight on a petition. And as a result, we had over 5 hours of witnessing in the House of Commons that resulted in the overturning of that reinterpretation. And so the spot prawn fishery was announced this year. It took us a whole year, but we continued to persist and this decision was overturned. And so prawn tailing and tubbing is able to continue. And I think this is one of the important features of community-supported fisheries is that active engagement with the democratic process. And I heard from so many of our members and from our harvesters who said, as a result of this incident, they suddenly had renewed faith in the democratic process. It was possible to have their voices heard and for justice to prevail. And so I think that's really important. We have power to be adaptable if we work together, and CSFs are an important part of that. Next slide, thank you. So lastly, I'll just say a couple of words about CSFs and how they make small-scale fisheries more adaptable to supply chain shocks. And so when the COVID-19 pandemic started, I'll give you a good example. Before COVID-19 even arrived in Canada, it was in Asia, and that was the start of the banquet season. And that's really the biggest market for Dungeness crab from British Columbia. And so overnight, the market for Dungeness crab disappeared, not because of anything anyone here had done, but because of things well beyond anyone's control. And if we export most of what we catch, then we are so vulnerable to international shocks, things like COVID-19, things like currency exchange rates, things like supply from other regions that are well beyond our control. And so, you know, we've all been shocked by things too, like empty shelves in grocery stores and realizing how dependent we are on things way beyond our control, these global factors that can be influenced by supply chain shocks, pandemics, climate change, and things like that. Next slide. But in the community-supported fishery model, when harvesters are pre-selling their catch directly to consumers in domestic markets, they're not at the mercy of things like currency exchange rates and fluctuations in global supply and pandemics and, you know, international demand for products that might not be sustainable or have openings for those things. And so when the catch is already bought and paid for, no matter what it is, we really help small-scale fisheries to be more adaptive and more responsive to change. Okay, I'll leave it there. I could talk all day, as you can tell, and I am going to talk all day. So there's another session, 1.1 on basic income. We're going to talk a little bit about basic income guarantees. Tomorrow, session 3.3 on getting governance right. I'm going to talk more about the community-supported fishery model. So if that interests you, you should come to my session. And then tomorrow at 6 p.m., 4.2, inspiring new pathways. We're also going to talk about community-supported fisheries, and I'll be around. If you're interested, I'd love to chat with you about the topic. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sonia. And I mean, this is such a great example that I think needs to be understood and amplified and adapted to different contexts. So thank you for sharing those insights. I also forgot to mention, we're going to hold the questions until after, and I'll pose a round of questions and we'll get questions from you and have the second half be more of an interactive discussion. So those of you joining online, you can always drop your questions in the chat. For those of you in the room, there's lots of pens on the table and jot them down on a piece of paper, but do hold on to those because we do really want to hear from you guys as well. So our next speaker is joining us virtually. It's Dr. Kenai Tokunaga. Kenai is a research scientist in coastal and marine economics at Gulf of Maine Research Institute, GMRI, located in Portland, Maine, in the United States. Her work uses data and economic modeling to understand how and why decisions around marine resources are made. She's interested in understanding how economic, for example, incentives and constraints, psychological and social cultural factors influence these decisions to impact the sustainability and equity of coastal and marine social ecological systems. Her current work investigates climate change impacts on fisheries allocation policies, understanding how the diversity of business models and climate implications in Maine lobster fishery, in the Maine lobster fishery, and understanding the role of Indigenous and local knowledge in climate resilience. Before GMRI, Kenai received her PhD in economics and graduate ocean policy certificate from the University of Hawaii. After completing her PhD, she worked as a researcher at the University of Tokyo Ocean Alliance. At the University of Tokyo, she looked at a range of topics, including fisheries co-management, marine spatial planning, food pricing, and coastal ecosystem services. She's originally from Tottori, Japan, famous for its coastal sand dune. In her spare time, she enjoys shopping at fish markets and farmers markets and trying out new recipes and ingredients. So please join me in welcoming Kenai.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm sorry that I'm not there in beautiful Newfoundland, but I'm joining here today from Portland, Maine. I am going to share my screen now, and please let me know if you're seeing the right presentation mode. All right, so yeah, please let me know if you're not seeing the right slides, but I don't think I need to introduce myself too many times because Sarah shared a lot about myself and in my research, but thinking a little bit about growing up, just as I was listening to earlier presentation, I was just thinking about how often I ate sardines and the horse mackerel growing up, because those are the species that are caught locally when I grew up in Tottori, Japan, and how I was getting tired of eating the same species over and over. But now I feel fortunate to have the chance to eat locally harvested seafood growing up. Now, today I'm going to talk about getting adaptation right, but I just wanted to introduce Gulf of Maine Research Institute. We're located in Portland, Maine, and our mission is to pioneer collaborative solutions to global ocean challenges. We are a nonprofit organization. We have about a third of the staff working on science. All of my colleagues are natural scientists, and I'm the only economist at the Institute, but we do a lot of interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary research. We also have an education team that brings, I think right now, 70 to 80% of the fifth graders from the state of Maine to do a half-day science education experience. And we also have a community team who works really closely with the fisheries and aquaculture stakeholders in New England in the United States. So Gulf of Maine Research Institute at GMRI. I run Coastal and Marine Economics Lab, and the goal of this lab is to help build well-beings of coastal and human communities. And by well-being, what I mean is the sustainability of natural resources, but also equitable access to nature by the coastal stakeholders. I am an economist, and most of my career I looked at, I think, the Pacific fisheries. I was first in Hawaii, then in Japan, and now I'm looking at more closely at Atlantic fisheries, primarily the Northeast United States, and I've been at GMRI for about 3 years now. But what I study the same species, right? I study human decisions and behaviors, how our decision impacts the natural environment, and then also how changes in the natural environment impacts the coastal livelihoods. So again, I think economists tend to study only the human and the nature relationship, and we sometimes kind of forget about the importance of human interactions, the social networks and social interactions. But my intent for this lab is to study the entire system, human relationships with the nature and also with other fellow humans. Okay, advancing slides. Okay, so I'm going to talk today about, I think, the 3 primary challenges I think we're facing in terms of getting adaptation right. The first is that our fisheries management is really history dependent, especially when it comes to access to fishery resources and also allocation of fishing opportunities. Second is that scientists often assume average year, average fishermen, and then how it's important to recognize the diversity. And the third point, is monitoring and data with changing environment, and a lot of the decisions are requiring more spatially and temporarily granular detailed data. And we also need to have more types of information and knowledge, not only about the resource, but other species that the resource interact. And then also we need to have some of the decisions are now requiring environmental data. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. But the first, what I mean by history dependent management when it comes to access and allocation is that when you think about the management system, it's often, I think, first thing that comes, the foundation of all the fisheries management really can boil down to the access and allocation of fishing opportunities. And there is man-made jurisdiction, national jurisdiction, that kind of determines who gets to access certain resources within the domestic. In the US case, here I'm depicting the regional councils and the state borders, but those man-made borders kind of determine who gets to access where. And when resources are moving with the climate change and all that, that man-made borders and the really history-dependent kind of borders make it really difficult to help fishing communities adapt to the changes that they observe in the water. And so we looked at 54 fishery systems around the world to understand how these allocations and access are allocated at the individual level. And we primarily looked at harvest quota-based management and area-based management. And what we found that majority of these systems allocate or provide fishing access based on history. In the case of harvest quota is often determined by historical catch. And in terms of the area-based management, such as territorial use rights fisheries, the rights are often granted to the coastal communities based on their historical access to the coastal waters. So again, we have really fishery history dependent fisheries management. And so many of the fisheries around the globe are experiencing change in resource conditions. The distribution of species are changing. More fisheries are encountering new species. So we did a case study of, these are more like mid-sized to larger scale fisheries, but I think there are lessons that we can draw from this case studies. That is that, so how are these fisheries coping with climate change? So we found that these fisheries are not being able to tackle the fundamental allocation question. So when it comes to changing who gets to access and who gets to harvest how much, it's really difficult to change the rule. Many fishers continue on to use the history-dependent allocations, but they are increasingly relying on existing mechanisms and provisions that make the allocation more flexible. So what I mean by that is that the fisheries are relying more and more on quota exchanges, quota swaps, or bilateral negotiations, which is great. These management are set up in a kind of robust, the management's quite, fisheries allocation policies are quite robust. But what we might not realize is that as these fisheries make using the existing provisions to make their allocation more flexible, we might be, in some cases, we're seeing the trade-off between allowing flexibility and maintaining the transparency and accountability of the allocation system. So this type of trade-off, I think we will start to see more and more in the future. The next thing is that I think it's really on, I think, scientists that we like to assume average, and especially when it comes to fisheries economics models often assume what we say homo economicus, which is that the humans make decisions, rational decisions, and that rationality to whom might be different from a person to person. So assuming average might not yield the useful information. So before I talk about assuming average fisherman or average harvester, I should also mention that we also often rely on average, and we think about average year in terms of average year. And what do you mean by average year? When you look at the Maine's lobster fishery landings, it's really hard to see what is the average, and what is the historical baseline that we're using to make many of the management decisions. Another thing is that when you start looking at the environment, the ocean temperature, you really starts to see that average is no longer a good baseline for making decisions. On the right side, I'm showing the sea surface temperature anomalies for Gulf of Maine and all these. So you can see that on the average year should be depicted by white color, and then red is a higher temperature than normal. And you're seeing that in the past 10 years or so, it's all red. So this is average year. What's average year is really a difficult thing to know. I think the harder question is, what's an average harvester? There is a diversity of fishery objectives, visions, perspectives, adaptation preferences, even the resource and economic constraints for harvesters and other the community members, even within the same one single fishery. And assuming average harvester and then doing science based on the average harvester might not yield useful information for many people. And just thinking about Maine's lobster fishery, we see different sizes of boat that go out to catch lobsters. Some operates more inshore, some operates offshore, some has a few steermen on boat, and their decisions are really different. So harvesters, they have to determine all these questions, and then all of these shape their business models. And it's really important to account for the diversity of these business models. So when we did a study looking at the technical and operational characteristics of Maine's lobster harvesters, and we found statistically 5 business models that were present in 2010. And what's more interesting is that when you look at Maine's lobster management zones, there are Maine's lobster fisheries divided into 7 management zones, and we saw a different representation of different business models in each zone. So again, climate implication, climate adaptation for who, we can't simply just think in terms of average anymore. And the third point I wanted to mention is that monitoring and data, and I think we've been hearing this a lot from all kinds of scientists by now. We need more data, we need more temporally and also spatially granular data. What we did a case studies of 18 fishery systems around the globe. I'm going to present a little bit about this afternoon, but we were seeing that many small-scale fisheries, which are depicted by orange, have global climate models only, and they need to rely on a global scale projections to make the decisions at the local level. And sometimes there's a really huge mismatch in terms of the what they're experiencing in the local waters and then what the global data is showing can be a challenge. But I think we have an opportunity as small scale fisheries. These are from the Japanese fisheries that I worked with previously to come into the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, but fishermen there had a really detailed note about their fishing activities, and they kept a journal. They had a reference to what happened in the water, what they witnessed, and how weather has been changing and all that detailed information. And some fisheries around the globe from the case studies are really formalizing this process. Participatory management is what we often talk about in the fisheries resilience kind of science world, but participatory data collection can be a very powerful way to that can help to get the adaptation right. And finally, I think this is kind of the point that I want to make is that we have fisheries management and management institution, and then when the environmental changes happens, this can really disrupt even a well-functioning system of resource governance. And what I think is really critical moving forward to have the resilient fisheries in 50 years is that this more emphasis on shared understanding within the community and also across communities and also across sectors, science, stakeholders, communities, industries, government, that with respect to resources, ecosystem, economics, expectations, sociocultural context, et cetera. I think we need to have this shared understanding, and I think there are many ways to build this shared understanding about our social ecological system or fishery system. But I think we cannot really have resilient fisheries without all of us kind of working together. And of course, everyone knows that, and I don't have to probably say it many times, but I think this really, I think, is the most critical thing at a very high level. And that's it. Thank you so much for having me join this plenary.
Thank you so much, Kanai. for your insights and what some of the key considerations are for fisheries science and management in light of climate change. So thank you for that. Our next speaker is Rick Williams. Rick is president of Praxis Research and Consulting, as well as the research director for the Canadian Council of Fish Harvesters. He's the project director for an ACOA-funded research and consultation project on labor supply and intergenerational succession challenges in the Atlantic Canada fish harvesting industry. From 2009 to 2013, he served as Deputy Minister to the Premier for Policy and Priorities in the province of Nova Scotia. He's led numerous reports, including a recent comprehensive labor study for the Canadian fisheries sector in 2015, highlighting looming labor shortages and challenges in recruitment, training, and retention. Please join me in welcoming Rick Williams.
Okay. All right, I'm going to come at things on a more macro level and from a perspective of what I think of as the political economy of the fishery, how policy is made and decisions are made, and the interaction with the economic development and changes in the industry. My overall purpose here is to provide those of you who aren't from the Atlantic region with a kind of picture, an understanding of what's going on in our regional fishery, and to explore and describe and explore one major, I'm calling it innovation or adaptation in fisheries policy and licensing policy, which has huge implications for small scale fisheries. And then I want to end up with kind of a challenge or a new idea about where we might go next with all of this. When I'm talking about small scale fisheries in this region, I'm really talking about it's not so much the size of the fishing enterprise or activity, it's more it being a community-based, independent-owned, owner-operator type of fishery, as in contrast to a more corporate structured fishery. I'm going to, in a one-sentence description, my main point here is that the biggest threat to small-scale fisheries is that the fishery is getting big. For most of the 45 years that I've been studying the fishery in this region, the fishing industry was a very small part of the regional economy, and it was not a growth sector. And most of the people who worked in the fishery were, by standard definitions, working poor people. They did not experience growth in their well-being over their lifetime careers in the fishery. All of that has changed dramatically in the last 15 or 20 years. The fishery transition from being, in this region, from being a kind of a high volume, low product value kind of industry to one that transitioned with the collapse of groundfish stocks and so on to being higher value products, higher quality products selling to higher end markets. And that has then had significant impacts on the incomes earned by people working in the fishery, on the value of fishing enterprises, and on the way the industry is structured. So I'm going to walk through some descriptions of some of that, but begin with a kind of an interesting kind of policy shift that's taken place in this context. So in 2019, the DFO, the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans Canada, brought in changes to the Fisheries Act and regulations that put into law two elements that had been policies since the 1980s, the owner-operator policy and the fleet separation policy. The owner-operator fleet separation first determined that companies that process fish could not own licenses to harvest fish. So that put a hardline separation in most, not all, but most of our fisheries between harvesters who would own the access rights to the fish and processing companies who, in order to operate, had to buy the fish and compete to get the fish from the harvesters. So a very, I think, quite important and unique structure. But those were policies that were easily undermined and gotten around for a long time. But in 2019, the changes to the Fisheries Act and regulations, put those things into law and made them stronger. This was the result of a 40-year struggle by harvester organizations to make that change and to defend those policies and have them enforced. So that's created this new world we're in which as the value of the fishery grows in the global marketplace, the harvesters harvest a significant part of that growth in value. Now, the future of this situation, though, is far from uncertain. Will this change, in a long-term basis, protect and ensure a red circle, the small-scale fisheries and ensure their economic sustainability? Well, there are some very other pressures coming to bear that make this problematic. There are wider economic and demographic trends, which I'll describe a bit. The government's actual support, enforcement and so on of these regulations is both uncertain and inadequate. And there are internal industry dynamics among harvesters that threaten, in my view, to threaten this overall kind of framework, regulatory framework. So I think, the real challenge today for harvester leaders and their organizations is to explore new ways in the new changing economic environment of the fishery to defend and build on and expand this new policy direction. In most resource industries, fisheries and other industries, the dominant economic model is centered on vertical integration. Vertical integration, the objective of which, and the orthodox economic religion really, is that vertical integration enhances capital investment in productivity and competitiveness on an ongoing basis. And it concentrates economic surpluses and decision power in large urban, national, and international corporate entities. Most resource industries are structured on this model. The fishery in British Columbia is structured on this model, and the contrast between the two coasts is something that we might discuss further in question period. So in this model, primary producers become price takers with limited market power. And they carry all the costs of sustaining the labor force. They carry the capital debt costs involved in the constant pressure to improve productivity. And they carry the risks associated with climate change, with market fluctuations, and with production risks. If as Sonia mentioned, a fish stock is in trouble and an announcement is made that it has to be shut down for the season, the harvesters carry all the risks of that lost income and their investments they've made in their enterprises, the debt loads, et cetera. So rural communities in this model are heavily dependent on the jobs and incomes that come from the resource industry, but they lose control over adjacent resources and their immediate environment, and the economic surpluses over time is drained away. So we all know all kinds of stories of resource industries that boom and then bust and leave deserted communities and impoverished people, et cetera. And that would describe, that model is dominant in agriculture in Canada, certainly, and as I mentioned, in the BC fishery, but not in this region. I'm going to take, the time to read a very detailed statement. This is the rationale provided by the Minister of Fisheries when they introduced the new regulations for owner, operator, and fleet separation. And it's just the wording of this that I find in my long history of studying Canadian politics and policy to be extraordinary. The Government of Canada's policy objective is for the Atlantic fisheries wealth to remain in the hands of those individuals that actively fish, and for the wealth accumulated to be reinvested and spent in coastal communities, rather than have it concentrated in the hands of a few wealthy corporations in large urban centers. Progressive fisheries policies that prevent vertical integration between the fishing and processing sectors and that prevent the concentration of licenses in the hands of a few corporations or individuals have been pivotal in the maintenance of the wealth distribution across the region and small communities. Without these policies, wealth from fishing licenses would be concentrated in the hands of ineligible third parties, resulting in fewer or lower paying fishing jobs available in rural coastal areas and a decrease of economic benefits being maintained in coastal communities. For that to be an official written government statement that runs directly contrary to our dominant economic model in Canada is quite extraordinary. The question then is, can this succeed? It's an unprecedented commitment to the rights of rural communities and primary producers to control and benefit from adjacent resources. It parallels in some way the kind of recognition of Aboriginal rights that because people have lived for generations or millennia in an area and have benefited from the resources, they have ownership, they have entitlement, as opposed to simply the highest bidder. It gives rural communities and resource users significant bargaining power within value chains, but it also transfers responsibility for the sustainability of the resources to those people who own the access rights. And we hope it provides foundations for rebuilding rural economies and populations that have been depleted over the last couple of centuries by the dominant resource extraction model. Just to put some numbers around the growth, going back to my first point about maybe the biggest threat to all of this is the economic success of the industry. Just to describe, put some numbers on that. Between 2010, after the Great Recession, until 2019, in the Atlantic region, we landed 20% less volume of fish. But the value of what we landed, the plant gate value, the revenues flowing to fishing communities increased from 1.8 to $3.5 billion, a 93% increase in constant dollar after inflation value. The export value grew by 76%, and the total Atlantic economy only saw an 11% growth in export value. So fisheries grew from being 10% of our export economy in the region to 16%. And of course, this region has a small population. Our economy depends to a large extent on exporting in order to be able to survive. So that gives the scale of that growth period, that's the growth trend that's happening in our fishery. And that's flowed through to revenues, incomes for fish harvesters. And Newfoundland saw a 60%, over that period, a 60% improvement in the average income of fish harvesters in the province in after inflation dollars. Nova Scotia, 73%, PEI, 136% growth in incomes. New Brunswick, 136. In contrast, BC, over that same period, there's a lot of things going on there, but where we do not have that protection of the owner-operator side of the industry, only a 22% growth, as seafood everywhere surges in value. The hard numbers there that you see for incomes, I won't dwell on, but we're talking about fisheries that in 80% of fishermen in Newfoundland, or in the Atlantic region, I say, are fishing for 6 months or less of the year. So those are half-year incomes, now approaching kind of what we would call middle-class incomes for fish harvesters. So what are there's the growth and the impact on a small scale fishery. What are the threats to being able to make this work over the longer term? I won't go into the details, but we are seeing, because of that overall explosion in the value of seafood, we're seeing massive flows of domestic and foreign corporate investment in the fish processing sector. And we've multinational corporations buying up locally owned processing plants and pulling them together into large conglomerate units. And that's going to create, with that kind of capital coming into the processing sector, that's going to create huge pressure on guaranteed resource supplies to those plants. So the owner operator and fleet separation policies will continue to be under that kind of pressure. Labor shortage and succession challenges in the industry. We have a competitive labor market across all rural industries in Atlantic Canada and beyond. So we need now to attract and retain new labor supply from non-traditional sources. Will we have the people to sustain small-scale owner-operator fisheries into the future is the key question. And then this new wealth flowing into the industry creates potential for divisions within and among harvester organizations and communities. The rising market value of enterprises, the rising value of the fish means the rights to harvest the fish grow dramatically. Fish harvesters that I would have again have known for 30, 40 years and who I would, in standard terms would be described as working poor are retiring now as millionaires and multimillionaires in terms of the value of their enterprise. There's conflicting interests then between young people coming in industry who want to be able to take over those and become owner operators themselves, but the cost of those enterprises now is beyond the reach of a typical working crew member in the industry. And then for those new people who have bought enterprises, they've had to take on massive debt to buy them at these prices. And will that create threats to the resource because people overfishing or fishing more intensely to carry those debt loads? So the economics of the industry are now bordering on perverse. Population decline is ubiquitous across rural regions and rural industries. In the Atlantic region, for example, for every 100 people who are at or beyond retirement, employed people who are at or beyond normal retirement age, there are only 55 to 65 young people in their rural communities coming into the labor force. So that sort of 40 to 45 new employees to sustain a small scale fishery are going to have to come from outside traditional fishing communities. So that's a huge challenge the industry will need to take on. I'll jump on. The changing age profile of fish harvesters. We are projecting in our research that 40% of the labor force will retire out by 2025, based on 2018 tax filer data. The industry, Newfoundland, for example, had the youngest fish harvesting population in Canada in 2000. In 2019, they had the oldest. So it's a very radical shift that's taking place. And again, will we have a fish harvester labor force to sustain small scale community-based fisheries? There's not a lot of hard data about rising enterprise values and prices. But as the fish in the water gains value, the rights to harvest it will grow in proportion. It comes down to a statement on a recent focus group that we were doing, a fish harvester in Prince Edward Island, who said that in this seasonal industry, there is a widening gap between what the hardest working person can earn and save as a crew member and what an enterprise is worth on the open market. If the current fishery is to carry on, something else will be needed to get crew across that gap to become the next generation of owner operators. So at the moment, the something else doesn't exist to get crew workers across that gap. So I'll just end up by saying, okay, where do we go with this? How do we protect this huge achievement to get the owner operator and fleet separation policies put into law? And now we watch it coming under increasing threat from inside the industry and from outside. I think the next step that needs to take place is on the level of governance or self-governance in the industry. We now have in this region a fishery that generates 4 billion in income flows to rural coastal communities and over 6 billion in export earnings to the region. Is now owned and controlled, but it's now owned and controlled by 10,000 small businesses. The harvesting sector is 10,000 small decision makers. It's a bit like herding cats, in other words, to try to get decisions to get moving in the same direction to deal with some of these very challenging issues. So who speaks for the industry, plans its future, and represents it at a national and international decision-making tables? In this region, half or more of fish harvesters do not belong to democratic organizations supported by mandatory dues with legislated authority to negotiate and sign agreements that would be binding on their members. So there's a fair amount of kind of disorganization or lack of organization to work together to face these challenges. Newfoundland, we can perhaps talk about that in discussion, but Newfoundland is a very, very important exception to that picture. So to meet future challenges, we are going to need to have, to sustain owner-operator community-based fisheries in the face of all these external pressures and internal kind of risks, we're going to need to have all harvesters represented by democratic organizations, well-funded by members' dues, with professional staff and legislated authority to represent their members and make binding agreements. As I say, we have that in Newfoundland and to some extent in New Brunswick. And moving beyond that, and this is me just thinking out, throwing out my ideas after 45 years of kind of struggling with all this, is a regional governance body for community-based fisheries. That we cannot rely on government to do it, to enforce the regulations, to invest sufficiently in the science and the management capacity to make all this work. The industry is going to have to take over itself. So something in the way of a kind of a regional governance body with representation from harvester groups from all different areas, with decision-making processes to decide on issues around conservation and stock protection and rebuilding strategies, labor force renewal plans, succession models, and so on. A professional secretariat to support and facilitate. I think the comparison here that's really important to think about, the government, is used to dealing with an industry by calling 2 or 4 or 5 CEOs from the large corporations to come in and let's make some decisions together and where we're going to go with this. What's the next 25, 30 years going to look like? How do you do that when you have an industry comprised of disparate small businesses spread over 4 or 5 provinces, et cetera? So some kind of governance structure, I think, will need to be in place in order to make that legal framework and license policy framework work over the longer term. So I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Rick. And I think we're going to probably get at some of those questions around governance tomorrow in the plenary on getting governance right. And so lots of great bridges across these different plenaries. We have our last speaker on the panel before we open up to questions, Alida Bundy. Alida is a research scientist with Fisheries and Oceans Canada at the Bedford Institute of Oceanography in Canada. In support of the sustainable use of our oceans, her research focuses on providing interdisciplinary science advice for ecosystem-based fisheries and oceans management. Alida uses interdisciplinary approaches such as empirical EBM indicators and ecosystem modeling, and has developed tools such as the iAdapt framework and an indicator guidance framework for further understanding of how marine social ecological systems respond to change. She currently co-leads the development of the Maritimes Region EBM framework and the DFO Maritimes Region Ecosystem-Based Management Working Group. She also co-leads the DFO Maritimes Region Ecosystem, oops, sorry, that was the same line. She also is part of the Canada-US Ecosystem Science Working Group and is a member of DFO's National Ecosystem Approach to Fisheries Management. So many different groups and ideas there. And in collaboration with the SHIRK Partnership funded V2V project, she co-leads the iAdapt working group. And I think we're going to hear more about this now. So welcome, Alida Bundy.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And thank you very much to the organisers of this conference to have an opportunity to speak to you today. Before I start, I just want to say that, yes, I'm a research scientist with DFO, and yes, I've been involved in lots of working groups, etc., within DFO to try and push advanced and ecosystem-based management. And I'm actually going to talk about that this afternoon. What I'm going to talk about this morning is the work that I've been fortunate enough to do internationally with groups outside of DFO. So you can see the labels here with IMBER, the International Marine Biosphere and Ecosystem Research Project, Too Big to Ignore, and the Vulnerability to Viability Global Partnership. I'm going to sort of step back and look at the question about adaptation from a higher level, or more of a bird's eye view, is a better way of putting it perhaps. So when we talk about when we talk about how to adapt, we have to think about, this is a question that's facing small scale fishing communities across the world. How does a small scale fishing community in Newfoundland or in BC, in the Arctic, or anywhere in the world, how do they start to make decisions about how to respond and adapt to the kind of changes that we're currently facing? Okay. There we go. So globally, small-scale fishing communities are facing the same kind of issues, and there's a list of them there. I'm not going to read them out for you. We're all familiar. These are as true in Canada, North America, as they are across the globe. So how do communities respond to change? How do they adapt? And we've heard some of that this morning. There are a range of things we can do. Look at new regulations, stop doing what we're doing, as there technical innovation solutions, different kind of governance arrangements, which we've just talked about briefly about. Do we have to move elsewhere? Are there alternative livelihoods? This is just a small selection of what that could include. But surely others have faced this problem before, and can we learn from what's been done elsewhere? So what I'm going to talk to you about today is this framework called I-ADAPT. Now, I-ADAPT stands for Assessment Based on Description and Responses and Appraisal for a Typology. This was originally developed by the IMBER Human Dimensions Working Group. Yinji is part of this group, Ratana was part of this group. And we developed this starting about, 5-8 years ago, I guess. In the working group, we identified that basically we have a lack of a coherent framework to identify what kind of coping strategies have worked elsewhere and what kind of options to respond to change are possible. So we developed this I-ADAPT framework. It builds on knowledge learned from past experiences of response to global change to enable decision makers, researchers, managers, and local stakeholders to its basis to make informed decisions based on these lessons learned, to triage and improve responses in a more timely manner, and to evaluate, and this is quite important, where to most effectively allocate resources to reduce vulnerability and adapt and develop capacity to enhance the viability of small-scale fishing communities. It's designed as a systems-oriented research and decision support tool, and it's based on contextualized place-based case studies derived from interdisciplinary work. So that's a lot of blah, blah, blah. What does it actually look like? Oh yeah, so the idea then, when faced with decisions, how to respond to change, the I-ADAPT tool will help to understand the issues being faced and how to explore potential responses. The I-ADAPT tool has a template which fully describes different case studies which provide information on how the others in different situations have responded to change. We develop a typology, which we'll talk about shortly. We can learn what responses have worked in different situations and why, and also where they may not have worked and why. What factors have enabled success? What factors have prevented success? And then the tool will enable researchers, decision makers to decide on the most appropriate response. So it has a theoretical background based in the first instance on socio-ecological systems thinking. We've talked about this briefly a couple of times already this morning. The idea is that human systems and natural systems are interlinked, interconnected, and what happens in one will affect the other. So this is the basis of the approach. It also borrows from the driver pressure state impact response, the DIPSR framework, and also interactive governance, which separates the idea of a governing systems and systems to be governed. And this figure on the right-hand side then shows the essence of the information being collected and the way it's structured. So looking at socio-ecological systems from a natural, a social, and a governance perspective, we begin by describing the state of these systems, describe the stressors affecting them, the change that these stressors cause, the impact on the three systems, capacities of the natural governing and social systems to address the changes and impacts, and then describing the responses. So we developed a template essentially to capture all this information. It went through various iterations over time, and the current state has about 30 questions and split into these different sections. So we collect information about the background of the situation, a description of the stressors and their impacts, vulnerability, governance and governability, describe the responses, and critical is an appraisal. Were those responses successful? If so, why? If not, why? And this is where we learn. Like, you can have all the description about the systems, but we need an appraisal to find out what actually happened and why. And so we can learn from this experience. We use all that information to develop what we call a typology. And this is basically a grouping of systems that have similarities. So it provides a kind of entry into the tool, if you like. This diagram is kind of trying to show you how we conceive this being used then. So you begin with your iAdapt template, which has, as I say, these key descriptors. We use these templates to develop the typology. Now imagine yourself, you're in a situation, you represent your harvesters, you're faced with a new situation, you need to respond to in some way. You can use this typology then to identify other cases which may have similar issues and have similar characteristics to your own. You can look there to see what types of responses worked, why, what didn't work, why, what was the kind of background situation. And then the template is a kind of condensation of, the typology is a condensation of much richer information that's captured in the template. So then there's a database, you can go and find out more information and then determine, are there lessons learned there that can be used for the situation that you're currently facing? And then you can identify, a research strategy, perhaps short-term response, longer-term response, monitoring. So it's a tool to guide decision-making, but also a tool for research. So that's the theory. We explored this in the IMBER Human Dimensions Working Group. We collect 20 case studies from around the world. These are all described in this book. And we developed a typology. So this is what the typology looks like. Again, it's kind of a clustering of these different systems. The why doesn't matter, or the how doesn't matter too much right now. It's more about what do you do with this information. So for example, we've got 5 clusters here. I don't know how I can point with this one, but there's the first cluster 1, for example, in the bottom right-hand corner. And this actually clustered 3 aquaculture oyster case studies together. And when you look at why they're clustered together, they have similar kind of values across their vulnerability and governance indicators. However, in these cases, many of the issues remain resolved, and their key issue is pathogen blooms, which still is an ongoing problem. Just to give you one more example, if you look at number 4, cluster 4, that's a collection of quite a diverse number of case studies. Commonalities is that they're all overexploited. The governance systems were considered to be weak. They're degraded due to anthropogenic pressures, some conflict situations. And from a power aspect and social power, this is very business dominated. So this shows you a brief example of how these groupings can then give you an entranceway into finding out what kind of responses and adaptations may have worked from elsewhere. There are some lessons learned. These are some key factors then that we've identified from this work that can contribute to more successful adaptation. So speaking to the point that Rick's just made, sort of move from more top-down management to co-management. And we know that it works, and based on these 20 case studies, but not always. One or two of these had more successful top-down management regimes, which worked quite well. Group cohesion and bottom support are important, and this speaks to what we've heard from Sonia and Rick this morning. Considerations of equity are important. Funding, resources, technological advances, these can all help with adaptation. Development of new markets, and this speaks to some of Sonia's points, can be key to adaptation, and clearly laid out roles and responsibilities. I think this again speaks a little bit to what Rick was talking about. You have 10,000 owner-operators. Who's responsible for representation to government? Just briefly then, I just wanted to touch on some of the work done by the Too Big to Ignore project, which collected, I think it was about 11 case studies of small-scale pelagic fisheries case studies from around the world. And on the top right-hand there, you can see the grouping of these into clusters. This was work Manuel Montoni led, and he divided his case studies into those that he diagnosed as highly adaptable, moderately adaptable, slightly adaptable, and with low adaptability in the bottom right hand there. And these were based on their scores across vulnerability, governance, and response. And so those that were highly adaptable had low vulnerability, high governability, and a high response. And at the opposite end of the scale, those with low adaptability had high vulnerability, low governability, and low response. And this again was based on the IADAPT template and the responses there. So you can see it sort of gives a bit of an understanding of how these case studies, how adaptable these different case studies are across the world. What we're currently doing in the V2V project, the Vulnerability to Viability project, which has 12 countries, 6 from Africa and 6 from Asia, where we're developing case studies. And we're using the IADAPT framework to both do a kind of rapid appraisal, a desktop study for each of the case studies in these countries to assess what do we currently know about the viability and vulnerability of these case studies from an adaptability lens, if you like, using the IADAPT template. What do we need to know, and how can we move from the vulnerability to the viability? And these 12 countries have quite rich and detailed different case studies, and the IADAPT template importantly forms a consistent method to compare and contrast across these case studies. So in preparation for this work, Babisha Kania, who's a master's student working with us, has been exploring the typology using all the case studies that I presented in the 2 previous slides. And he's going to present this work on Tuesday, as you can see in Salon D. And then if you want to learn more about the V2V project in general, that's going to be this evening in Salon C at about 6 o'clock. So this is ongoing work. This is my main point for showing this slide. Most of our work so far has been focused on parts of the world outside North America. So I want to use this as an opportunity to invite you, if you have, if you think this is a tool that could be of use to the work that you're doing, either in your research or in your organizations, and we'd be really interested to broaden this to more specifically look at North American case studies. So you know where to find us. Whoops. And I think I have one more slide. Yeah, so just to sum this up then, there's 4 main areas that we think the IADAPT template can be used as a research tool to better understand how small-scale fisheries communities can adapt, et cetera, et cetera. You can use a typology to explore what makes successful responses to global change. It can also be used as a monitoring tool. We have these 30 questions in this template, and these questions form the basis of a monitoring tool. It can be used as an educational tool, and fundamentally as a decision support tool, how to make decisions, how to respond to change. And then finally, who will use it? The IADAPT, it can be used by all sorts of people. Managers for decision-making, that's the Bedford Institute in that top left-hand corner. We use like stakeholders, researchers, community groups, decision makers, students to do research. And we hope with this, as we build our case studies, that we can learn more and more about how to get adaptation right. And I'll stop there and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alita. It's really nice to hear about a tool that is something really tangible that others might be able to find out about throughout the week and really use to bring some of these things to work. So we're now going to launch into the sort of second component, which is where we want to hear from all of you guys, your questions within the context of getting adaptation right and within the sort of framing that has been put out by our plenary speakers who really highlighted what some of the challenges are and what some of the opportunities are for getting adaptation right, including some of the great examples we heard from. To be really inclusive of our virtual participants, I wanted to ask Maria, who's also a chair on this plenary, to bring forward any questions that have come up from our virtual participants first, and then we'll get anyone in the room to bring forward their questions. So Maria, any questions from? Oh, there are no questions from the online participants. So we'll go into questions from you guys. Go ahead. Yeah, you can step right up to the mic there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm Kevin Scribner from the States, and I have a question for Sonia that's trying to weave together some of the, connect to the other presentations. So noting that there is climate affecting of the fisheries on the BC coast, and you guys you have cumulatively right now a certain amount of access to species within your 40, you're the 40 boat fleet, but knowing that we're having trouble with sockeye on the Fraser River. So how are, you guys looking to the future in terms of getting access to species that, and when they may change their range of where you can actually fish? So it's an access issue to follow abundance. But then a question that we've tried to, what Rick was saying, is that it seems to me what the CSF model is actually vertical integration. So you're actually connecting the fish harvester with the processor and the sales kind of thing. So and maybe this is a question back to you, Rick, is that if you take the policy that's on the Atlantic that separates the fish harvester with the processor side, does that, limit what Sonia and Skipper Otto is doing, is vertically integrating that thing? So does that make sense to weave that together?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big question. Thanks, Kevin. I'll start with that because it's fresh in my mind, and then maybe I'll work backward. So the threat to vertical integration, I think, to be clear, Skipper Otto doesn't own quotas, licenses, or processing, or any of those pieces. And so I think, we work with processors who are willing to do custom processing, what you call it. So a processor who will take your fish and give it back to you cut, not just buy it from you. So we depend on that, and we need to see that kind of custom processing remain available. Many of the First Nations that we work with are working toward expanding processing in their territories. And so I think that's something that gives me hope for the future for access as well, is that increasingly there is more access for First Nations for economic opportunity fisheries, and also for processing opportunities, and for sort of local governance, local management. So I don't know if I have a great answer for the first part of your question, but I think that what we always say is that it needs to start with listening and being available to understanding what is happening and what opportunities are arising. So we listen to our harvesters and we listen to our First Nations leadership around how are things shifting, where are there opportunities, and then we ask how can we be of service to that, rather than as kind of top down, which is that I need to buy this much fish and I need to process it, and then that's the profits that I need to make. And instead of that, it's allowing the harvesters and those organizations to lead the direction. Does that answer the question? Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry, Rick. Trippy there. And following abundance. Yeah, I mean, I guess the best answer that I have for that is you're right, with sockeye abundance being so precarious, and we're only going to see that continue with climate change. I think it's around pursuing what is abundant. So I gave the example of hake. Now, I know a lot of people are not going to be happy to have hake instead of sockeye salmon on their plates, but I think it's an education piece with members. And when you're working directly with members over the course of a whole year, you have that opportunity to do education to help them understand. Whereas if you're selling off pieces of fish in a grocery store, you don't have the opportunity to explain to people why this is a better choice, why you should be pursuing this. And as I say, if squid do come back to our waters, I hope that our policymakers will be able to quickly provide commercial opportunities, which they have done in Alaska, but not so much in British Columbia, to actually have like real-time data, and then to use that data very quickly to create fishing opportunities for what is abundant in that year. So I think it's just staying open to those opportunities. Yeah.
There are real advantages in developing an industry to vertical integration. Every year, the Fisheries Council of Canada, representing the big companies, goes to the government and says too much money is being paid for the fish at the wharf. The fishermen, in other words, the fishermen are making too much money. We need that money because we'll invest it in R&D and product development and market development and all that stuff to grow the industry. So that's true, that there is an argument. However, there are lots of working models where you don't have vertical integration and where various collaborative relationships and mechanisms like collective bargaining, like marketing boards and things like that are able to sort out those issues so that an industry can work together even though it's not vertically integrated. If you look at the fisheries in Norway, for example, you have fleet separation, but you have industry councils that sit down and develop fishing plans and economic development strategies to all work together. If you look at the fishery in France, for example, they have a highly developed local marketing system, and it really works really well. So you don't need to have vertical integration to achieve those objectives.
Any other questions? Separate mic would be good. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Hannah Harrison. Thanks all for really wonderful talks. Sonia, this is probably most for you, but it was certainly open to everyone else. I'll say that I'm a very happy Skipperato's member and really love your product. But I wondered if you would riff a little bit on the concept of where local becomes too big and how far seafood could be shipped or should be shipped before it starts to kind of run into some of the other problems that I think we've heard about here, and I'm sure we'll hear about the next few days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the definition of local is something that we at Local Catch talk about all the time, which is how do you define local, particularly when you're in areas like British Columbia, which are so vast and where populations are condensed into certain areas and not into others. So we've all wrestled with this idea of what is local. Is it geographic or is it relational? And so for us, we think of local as being about relationship and how closely you're connected to the harvester. It isn't about as much about geography as it is about relationship connections. And we can look back, over thousands of years, coastal First Nations who traded fish over the Rockies for thousands of years with other communities. This has been the definition of local fish for a very long time in British Columbia. So I think that that's probably the most important definition of local for us. Sometimes we'll hear people say this question of, well, if Skipperado sells fish to customers in Ottawa, how is that a local food system? And I do think it is. I do think when people, at the holidays, they send we do Secret Santa letters from our members to our harvesters. And when you have someone in Ottawa taking a picture of their family dinner, with their dog and their grandfather and sending that to the harvester to say, thank you. I know how hard you worked on harvesting this and what it meant to get this to me in Ottawa. And so thank you. So there's that direct relationship. And to me, that's a far more sort of tangible definition of local than number of kilometers. So I think in so much as community supported fisheries can continue to connect people and repair relationships, then the geography is not as significant, particularly if you live somewhere where there aren't fisheries. I don't think that a reasonable solution is that if you live in Saskatchewan, you shouldn't eat fish, or you should only eat, Northern Lake fish. I think that for health reasons, for so very many reasons, eating fish that's from British Columbia, if you live in Winnipeg, is a healthier and more environmentally sustainable solution than shrimp from Thailand, for example.
Does anyone else on the panel want to comment on any of those? No? Okay. Do we have any other questions from the, oh, Maria has one from the virtual participants.
I have a question from Diana Burbano from Dalhousie University. She's a postdoctoral fellow. She asks, to Kenai online, how does she think or consider her work findings can be directly integrated into small-scale fisheries policymaking at a higher governance level?
I'm assuming that I'm appearing on the screen.
We hear you loud and clear.
Okay, all right, good. So yeah, this is a really good question. I think this is something I think I also kind of struggle to answer too. So I'll just have to probably preface that the governance system that I'm most familiar with are Japanese systems and the United States. I think that's really important to mention that the backgrounds, because I think policy formation process look very different from country to country. The case of the US, I feel like it differ from state to state. So I should say, so I'll first mention the United States case. I think I'm thinking about small scale fisheries in the state of Maine, soft shell clam fishery, and also lobster fishery too. I think they both have very co-management structure, and I think the U.S. management in general has co-management structure with harvesters and the industry stakeholders being involved with the decision making. But I think in general, I think when the fisheries decisions are being made, I think the co-management is the key, and then decision has to be made at the level that is most relevant. So in the case of soft shell clam fishery in Maine, the municipal government, municipal shellfish committee plays a key role in making the decisions about their local intertidal resources. I think it's a good framework. And for the lobster case, is the state and also the lobster management zone council and committees. And also, so I guess to answer your question, I think that the policy, I think even the high level, national level policy needs to recognize that hierarchy and the scale of decisions. And ideally, in the ideal world, I think the scale of the decision has to match the ecosystem, the social ecological system, both the ecosystem and also the social system. I think it's really key. And I think the Japanese case, while they are doing the fisheries reform a few years back, I think the hardest part that they have to deal with, and that they're probably still dealing with, is that how to manage the coastal fisheries that are managed by territorial use rights, because the local communities now has strong say in how to manage their resources, making day-to-day decisions. But by updating the fisheries policy at the national level, will there be more presence of national government kind of making more top-down decisions? So I think, that's a really hard question, but I think from what I studied and from my understanding of fisheries, small-scale fisheries system in the US and Japan, I think the governance policy needs to recognize the local, the level, the size, I guess the level of the decisions needs to match the social ecological system, the size of that social ecological system where that decision applies.
Are there any other questions, Maria, from the virtual participants? And then we'll go to Pradeep.
There's a question from Stefan Scott for Alida. How did you define success in your case studies of top-down versus co-management? For example, by fish stock stability, sustainable incomes, and community resilience.
Is this on? Yeah. We define success, we use a sort of outcomes-based approach, if you like. So in the template, we asked what were the objectives of the responses that were used for each of the individual situations. And then we asked a question about whether those objectives were achieved. And if they were achieved, how? If they were not achieved, why not? So it was basically, it wasn't specific to did a specific stock improve or did A, B, or C happen. It was defined by how the objectives were defined and whether those objectives were met, because it had to be general enough to apply across a whole range of different types of case studies. And so I don't know if that answers the question, but that's how we did it.
Thanks, Alita. Pradeep, did you have a?
Thank you for the wonderful panel and the perspectives that you provided. And what we heard is that, the need for adaptation is at multiple levels, right from the producer, consumer to the macro level to very case study, community oriented kind of, levels. But when you look at the overall scheme of things within small scale fisheries, it almost feels like, or often argued, that the onus of adapting falls on the small scale fishers themselves. Everybody else is engaged in creating situations within which the small scale fishers are left to adapt and survive and respond. So learning from all of these multiple perspectives, how do we then decide, in terms of getting adaptation right, who is to adapt and at what level adaptation best be taking place? How can you address that? Otherwise, we are just going to push the responsibility of adapting to the small scale fishers that are increasingly being marginalized in the face of all the capacity and all the resources that exist in this world. Thank you.
Thanks. Do you want to maybe jump in, Rick or Sonia? And then
I think what I have to say is what Rick is going to say, and he'll say it better than me. So I really think you should start. Yeah, go.
Okay. The biggest thing is that small scale fishers need to stop being small scale in the way they participate in the governance of their fishery. So I think the biggest single shift we need is from co-management, which is essentially a consultation process, to or consultation based with government being the decision maker, to decision making by collectivities of harvesters, either at the local and regional levels. I think so. Give them both the power and the responsibility.
Lydia, do you want to chime in?
I don't have an answer per se. I think Rick and Sonia are better informed than I, but I'm going to actually throw a question back at you, Rick, and ask you, we have this image of small scale fishers as a rugged individualist, which is why we don't have these great corporations linking them all together. So how do you overcome the challenge of the individual operator enjoying that individuality and not, being beholden or part of a bigger organization?
It's difficult. There are a number of leaders here from harvester organizations, and if you talk to them, they will describe, many examples of how divided fish harvesters can be, even at the local level, how competing interests, little guys, big guys, rich fishermen versus not so rich, etc. So it is hard work. It's process. But the Fishermen's Union here in Newfoundland, I think, would be a leading example, probably in North America, if not the world, of how over 20, 30, 40 years, people do learn to work together. They do learn to accept decisions being made democratically, that people learn to accept not winning in order to serve the larger interest. But it requires professional staff, highly skilled support people. You know, and what's exciting to me about the new wealth that's flowing into small scale fisheries in this region is that now not having the money is not a barrier so much. It's the structure, it's the leadership, the creating the democratic structures and so on. You know, really a lot to do, but it is, yeah, it's very difficult, but it can be done.
Yeah, and I think there's one small thing I'll add to connect to something in your presentation, Rick, as well. Thinking about the role of government and policy making to make policies that reflect our values is something that I think we need to see happen. And when you read out that statement from the federal government about the effects of owner-operator and fleet separation policy in terms of the expression of this value of the value of the fishery flowing into the hands of coastal communities, I think that we have too often seen what the I'm sorry, I don't know your name, sir, that asked the question, which was, you know, how that we so often put the expectation on the harvesters to adapt to whatever this policy that's made in not in any way in consultation or connection with harvesters. So I think that there's a real role here for decision makers and policy makers to consider how policies will actually play out in terms of the expression of our values, you know, wanting to create good middle-class jobs, which is right in the minister's mandate letter. How do we create good middle-class jobs in coastal communities? Are we creating policies that will allow that to happen? And I think too often we're not, we're just creating policies over here and we're expecting harvesters to adapt to those.
Thank you so much, Sonia, for that. We probably have time for one last question before we have a wrap up couple of words from the audience. Looks like someone's stepping up now.
Hi, my name is Barry Derby. I'd like to thank Rick for an excellent analysis of the situation. My question is, what's a harvester? Who is a harvester, and how do you become one? Because it seems to me that there's two answers out there. One is someone with $500,000, or someone who knows someone with $500,000 who'll give you a berth on a boat. And these are, neither one of those are satisfactory to me. So, and perhaps a question to Ms. Bundy, why is there not a recognition of professional harvesters as someone who is able to fish? That the right, once you get to be a harvester, a professional harvester, why doesn't that give you the right of access to fish in the same way that a plumber who gets a plumbing license is able to go plumbing, a doctor who gets his MD is able to go doctoring? Thank you.
Thanks for that question. Rick, did you want to start with that?
Again, Newfoundland leads our world here in Canada in terms of having an apprenticeship system in place. We are going to have to bring in, as I mentioned, large numbers of people into the fishery who didn't grow up in fishing communities or weren't in fishing families. Maybe they'll be international immigrants, or they'll be urban to rural or whatever. And Newfoundland has an apprenticeship system where you can walk in the door and you can know that in 2 years or 4 years, I can get, if I do these trainings, if I have this experience, I can get to the point where I can access. Now, if we can do as happens in some other countries where as soon as you hit that level of being a qualified journey person fish harvester, a professional fish harvester, you have access to significant financial support to become an owner operator, to make that step across. Other regions of Canada don't have apprenticeship models, don't have. So really, it's only the money that gets you in those situations.
Thanks, Rick. I know Alita's not here representing DFO, so I don't know if there's someone else in the audience who wants to respond to that question, or Alita, if you want to take a crack. No.
No, I just want to say to the speaker, I can talk with you privately afterwards or point you in the right direction, but I'm not the expert in those matters to respond to you right now. Sorry.
There is lots of diverse expertise and positions in the room here, so I definitely encourage everyone to interact over the next couple of days about all of these questions and issues. So we're kind of getting to the end of the plenary, or this particular plenary. I'd like to give the opportunity just for a couple of final words from each of our plenary panelists, and just ask them if they don't have anything specific burning that they want to share, what would be the one thing that you would advocate for in terms of getting adaptation right? Obviously, there's many challenges that we've heard of and some great examples and some of the opportunities that we heard from in these presentations, but just to leave you with that one thing that they think should be prioritized. So we'll start off with Sonia.
Yeah, I think obviously I believe that we should be prioritizing domestic markets for seafood. And I think that we should be thinking about, thinking that it is really important who is eating the seafood that we harvest. So I really encourage from a harvester level for harvesters to consider some portion of your sales going into domestic markets. What would that look like for you? What would be the benefits to you, not only economic, but also relationally, culturally, socially, and in terms of that policy advocacy piece that I speak about. So I think also there's a place for people doing research to look a little closer into what are some of the effects of domestic sales of seafood. And I loved what you had to say, Alida, about the I adapt and like, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's look at examples of where it's happening, what's working well, and learn from that and not reinvent the wheel.
Thank you, Sonia.
Yeah, the one thing I would like is for the rest of Canada to become like the Newfoundland fishery. That every fish harvester who owns a license pays dues into a professional organization to represent them, and that there's an apprenticeship system to bring people into the industry in a systematic and a very, very effective way.
Go Newfoundland. Alida, oh, actually, we will hand it over to Kenai, sorry, and then to Alida. If Kenai is still with us.
Yes, I will repeat, I think, what I said in my last slide, which is that shared understanding, participatory governance, or however way you phrase it. I think empowering all parts, everyone, I guess, and to be engaged in the decision making. It's costly to make collective decisions, but I think at least we can all make an effort to understand different perspectives and then also participate in that process of kind of thinking about adaptation. And then just, I guess, we might feel like we're losing this battle of climate change, but we gotta stay positive. And I think that's really important, because if we just give up on this, then we feel, we don't matter, right? So we have to stay positive and then just commit to, I guess, be a part of the adaptation at different levels and at all capacities.
Thank you, Kenai. Alida.
Thank you. Well, I certainly agree with everything that's been said already. And this, I don't think that there is a single, best step forward. But thinking of this, I think any of these issues have to be considered from a sort of systems approach, thinking of them, sort of what are the networks, the socio-ecological governance aspects. And that kind of encompasses more of an ecosystem-based management approach, but we haven't talked about yet. But these are embedded systems in a broader context, and thinking about what are the key drivers of the change, what possibilities, and as Sonia reminded us, thank you, but what have we already done elsewhere and what can we learn? There's no simple answers, there's a range, and so we need to think that from a systems perspective.
Thanks, Alida. So thank you all for joining this first thematic plenary of this Congress. And I just want to invite you to give a round of applause for our panelists, and hope to see you and chat to you throughout.
Thank you. And thanks to Sarah and Cindy for that wonderful sharing of the session. So we had great conversation already. There's a lot of things to think about, and that is now break time. We go to lunch, and then we can continue with the conversation. So please come back here at 1:45 to enjoy the next session, which is about getting small right. Thanks so much, everybody.